On this computer. Hello, and happy game day to us all. Today is November 2nd, 2019, and at 3:30 today, Georgia will be beating Florida. But we're not here to talk about football. We're here to talk about family therapy. So let's get to it. And go.
All right. Well, thank you, Ashley, for that festive introduction. Today, like Ashley was saying, we're going to be talking about family systems, talking about family therapy, and just some information to kind of get us started before we really get into the weeds with some of the founders and some of the other basic information of it. So, some things to know about family systems. These ideas right here are essentially universal to the family systems in general. So when we talk about systems, we're talking about the individual, or it's just the client that we're working with, basically. And then the subsystems are essentially going to be like the family, the community, the groups, the grouping or the subgroupings that they might be in. And then, of course, the roles that they function in. And then there's also ideas of like generations and the boundaries, like whether they're clear boundaries, they're diffused, they're not, they're meshed. Just the role of boundaries that it plays whenever you're working with a family. And there's this idea of homeostasis, and I want to encourage you guys to think of it kind of like a mobile, like you would have in a nursery. So when everything is where it needs to be, it's balanced, it's spinning around. But when it's not, that mobile that you might see in nursery is kind of tilted. So a lot of the work that we're doing in family systems work, it's not at homeostasis, it's more tilted. So just kind of think of it like that. Another general idea when it comes to family systems is that we can really only be understood within social context. So relationships are really central, like how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to others, and that the fact that the client is or can be the entire system. And the more we talk about the work and the different perspectives of the theorists, the more that'll make sense. So systems, a very basic definition of this, is that they're parts of an organization as well as the relationship among those parts. So whether you're a cog in a wheel or you're a circuit in an electrical panel, you're part of something bigger that is connected to and impacting other parts of said system. Okay, so from here we're going to start to talk more about some of the noteworthy theorists within family systems, and eventually we'll go into more experiential stuff and explore it from there.
All right, so we're going to start by talking about Virginia Satir. So Virginia Satir is known as the mother of family therapy, and she is actually known as the 5th most influential therapist of all time. Now, this might come as a surprise to you because she's actually not very popular in North America, but she's popular in other countries such as Thailand, China, Czech Republic, South Korea, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. So she's an experiential family therapist, and she's known for her positive approach with families and with other human beings. She's noted for saying things like, problems are not the problem, but coping is the problem. She really believed in the family unit and believed that feelings of worth can only flourish in an atmosphere where individual differences are appreciated, mistakes are tolerated, communication is open, rules are flexible. And she believed that that was the ideal of a nurturing family, was to have those components. So she was known for turning negative situations into positives. With one family she was working with, A father and a mother brought their teenage son in. He was 16 years old, and the father was a pastor. And they brought him into family counseling because he had gotten his girlfriend pregnant. And she walked into the room, and the mom and the dad were on one side of the room, and the son was on the other. And she walked in and introduced herself and said to the son, "Well, your father has told me a lot about the situation on the phone. And I just want to say before we begin that we know one thing for sure. We know you have good seed." And then she turned to the mom and said, "Could you start by telling us your perception?" So that's one example of how she would kind of blow up the family system from the get-go by turning negative situations into positives. She saw family members as trapped in roles that were toxic and not helpful, such as victim, placator, defiant one, and the rescuer. Virginia Satir was known for her interest in communication with the added dimension of emotion. So she believed that toxic dynamics came from survival, what she termed as survival coping stances, which were blaming, placating, distancing, and computing. And she believed that these stances were the inability to communicate openly and be straight with one another. So basically, she felt like, from her experience, that bad communication was a disconnect between what was going on internally and what was being said on the outside. She thought when internal experiences of feelings, thoughts, and expectations were able to be authentically communicated in words and tone and body language, that the family was in a good and healthy place. So some techniques that Virginia Satir utilized was that, first of all, she was very active in her work with the family. So she was known for not just standing by idly in the therapy room and doing just talk therapy, but she was active with her clients. She stood up during sessions. She touched her clients. And she was known for this quote that she said here on the side, that we need 4 hugs a day for survival, 8 hugs a day for maintenance, and 12 hugs a day for growth. So she used touch a lot with her clients, which was really different. And she would use touch with families, and she would demonstrate with parents how they were to touch their kids tenderly. Because what she found is a lot of parents didn't know how to use touch to soothe their children. And she would even teach families how to use touch as a means of dealing with misbehaviors with children. And she said that she found touch to be much more effective with pre-verbal attachment issues than regular talk therapy. And she would say, "See, touch that comes out of kind ambience, which was there at the time, says things no words can say." She was also known for experiential exercises of visualization with parents. So one exercise she would use with clients would be to have the parent bring a difficult situation to their mind that was kind of recurrent with their child. Then she would ask them, "Okay, now while closing your eyes, I just want you to visualize and run the movie of the situation in your mind. And I want you to notice how you feel, what you see, and what you hear." And then she would have the parent report that back to her. Then, after that, she would have the parent re-experience the situation, but this time as the child. And she would have them visualize the entire situation slowly in detail and imagine seeing it through the child's eyes. And she would tell the parent to let themselves feel what the child must be feeling. And she would ask them, "What do you notice? What might you hear your child needing or feeling in this moment? And what are you that you weren't aware of as the parent?" And then the last part of this exercise is she would have the parent re-experience the situation again, but this time as an observer, watching the interaction between the parent and the child. And she would say, "Watch and listen. And what do you notice about how you and your child are responding to one another? And what do you see more clearly about yourself?" And so this was a different type of technique used in family therapy to help grow the parent's awareness of how they're interacting with their child. And finally, which one of the techniques she's most known for is family sculpting. So family sculpting is when the therapist has one person of the family arrange the other family members as a graphic means of portraying each person's perception of the family and that person's place in it. So there's a picture down below. You can see her. She's actively engaging with this family member, having them sculpt out the family together. And she used sculpting to have clients show their basic communication stances that I mentioned earlier, of the blaming, the placating, the distracting, and the computing. She would have them act it out in these by these sculpting measures. And she would have them demonstrate their internal feelings through shaping their bodies. And one thing that was kind of cutting edge about her is that she really began to engage the body, because she believes that the body and the affect were the fastest ways to get on non-rational pathways and the most direct means of getting to core problems within the family.
So in talking about another fundamental theorist in family therapy, we can move on to talking about structural family therapy, which was founded by Salvador Minuchin. Minuchin was a psychiatrist who was trained to do individual psychotherapies, but when he was working with delinquent boys, he came up with his approach on structural family therapy. And so structural family therapy believes that the families and the system is the power over the psychopathology. So in structural family therapy, the concern is more of what maintains a dysfunction as opposed to what causes it. Structural family therapy focuses a lot on the here and now processes of what's happening in the room or in the conflict that is being discussed during therapy that day. And another big key concept of structural family therapy is the presence of boundaries. So Minuchin said that disengaged families have very rigid boundaries that do not allow for family members to share and talk appropriately with one another about problems or even good things. An organized family has very clearly marked boundaries. They know I can talk to sister about this, and I can talk to mom about that, and they have a good understanding of what's appropriate for each member. And meshed families have really diffuse boundaries where everyone just kind of talks to everyone about everything, and it can lead to some pathology in that children know things that they don't need to know about the family, and parents rely heavily on children. And so he theorized that dysfunctional families respond to demands for change in pathological ways. And so when the boundaries are shifting and boundaries are changing, that is when problematic behaviors arise in the family. So the goal of structural family therapy is to restructure families to free members to grow and relate. And so in doing that, Minuchin would challenge the boundaries, and he would challenge the rules and roles that were set up in the family. So this goes back to that concept of homeostasis Chase was talking about. In structural family therapy, Minuchin would help the family actively kind of change their homeostasis. What was their expected normal, their expected boundaries, rules, and roles, and shifting those to a new normal and helping the family with that adjustment. He would do that by not only changing the rules and relating boundaries, he would have to provide a lot of education on appropriate roles and boundaries, and then reframing. So taking a situation and looking at it differently. So for example, in the cartoon, Bart is saying, "This is the worst day of my life," and Homer says, "This is the worst day of your life so far," reframing it to mean that this so far is the worst, but there may be worse in the future, which is not a happy example, but I think he uses it a lot with families in looking at, your child has failed a bunch of tests. Well, they've failed a bunch of tests up until now, but what could the future look like? And another key family therapy was Bowen. He lived until 1990, and he developed this theory originally to schizophrenic patients at an inpatient facility he worked at. But then he took the concepts and really apply them to his own family. He kind of used his family as the guinea pigs for his theory. And so there are a few key components that I'm going to talk about before we move into a couple of exercises involving Bowen. So the goal of Bowenian family therapy is to increase differentiation of self from family and the emotional system, and then to detriangulate family members. So the idea is that the more an individual is able to separate themselves in healthy ways and individuate from their family, the healthier they will become. Now, the problem is that oftentimes in families, there are triangles, and in all relationships. The triangle is something that happens in a system when three people may be in a relationship, and it could be more, where a mother and daughter go shopping one day and they come back and they don't bring the shopping bags in, and they say, hey, don't tell dad. Well, dad's now been triangulated and left out of the relationship. And so in Bowenian therapy, the more triangulated child or spouse or sibling is the one who is showing the pathology and becomes the identified patient, when in reality it is a systemic problem. And so Bowen really takes to looking at the systems and changing the way that the relationships work to align with each other, as opposed to in triangulated approaches.
All right, can you guys hear me on there? Can you just nod your head real quick? Ashley, okay, awesome. So I'm gonna go over a case study with you guys. This is one of the ones that we've emailed out to you, and I hope you read it, but I'm gonna go over it with you today. In consideration of Bowen's family system concept. So we've kind of introduced that, and I want to point out a few in an actual live case study that we're going to do with you guys. So I'm going to read it, and if you could just kind of follow along, maybe pull out a piece of paper and write down maybe some key characters like I pointed out here, and some different things that you're noticing as we go along. So a client, 19-year-old Caucasian female, her name is Sarah. Sarah is currently in her first year of community college. She is studying nursing and plans to transfer to a local college to continue her BSN degree to become a labor and delivery nurse. So she's currently living at home with her mother, Karen, and her younger sister, Emily. Her mother, Karen, is a 46-year-old Caucasian female who is divorced, and she works as a real estate agent to support her family as a single parent. The client's younger sister, Emily, is 16 years old and a junior in high school. Emily was born about 10 weeks prematurely and has some mild muscular developmental delays due to her premature birth. Sarah is coming to see you as an available resource offered through her community college. So you're a college counselor in this situation. She tells you that she's currently experiencing great strain on her relationship with her mother at home about her dating relationship. She states that she met her boyfriend in her church youth group about 3 years ago, and they officially began dating about 13 months ago when they both decided to become youth group leaders at their church. She feels that her boyfriend will be proposing soon, as he's had several discussions with her about marriage, and he'll be returning from aviation training as a part of his new military assignment. Sarah's mother feels very strongly that they have taken their dating relationship far too seriously for their young age. Her mother is worried that the only reason they want to get married so quickly is so that they can live together, as they have vowed to save cohabitating and themselves for marriage. However, her mother insists that living together is not all it's cracked up to be, and cites her divorce from Sarah's father as an obvious evidence of how relationships can fall apart without warning when you get married too fast. Her mother not only resents their desire to get married in the church, she often reminds Sarah that she needs to help out at home with Emily, who tends to need some minor assistance in daily tasks due to her muscular delays. Sarah notes that Emily despises being assisted and enjoys doing things on her own, even though it might take her a little bit longer than the average person. Emily consistently reminds Sarah that she should move into the dorms when she transfers to the state college, so that way Emily can take the bigger room that Sarah is currently in at home. Sarah notes that her boyfriend and mother do not get along as well as she would like, but her boyfriend does try to prove to be a responsible young man to their mother. She would like her mother to be more understanding of her desire to get married and honor her personal values, even though her mother's marriage did not work out as planned. She's also nervous to have both of her parents at the wedding. In all of her excitement to get married and move out, she does feel somewhat guilty leaving her sister Emily behind. After all, she did choose her career as a labor and delivery nurse due to her sister's premature hospital care when she was born. Okay, so that's the case. A couple things that we want to point out. So our key family characters in this case study is Sarah, Karen, Emily, the father, and the boyfriend. The core reason for coming into counseling is Sarah's strained relationship with her mother, or at least that's what the core reason is up front. So some concepts of Bowen's family systems that we could apply. We noticed a few things. So the first thing we see there's a triangle. So triangle is a concept that describes a three-person relationship and is considered a core component of a larger emotional system. So even though we have about 5 key family characters, what we notice is the triangle here is Sarah, Karen, and Emily. Also, differentiation of self. So we have 3 people who are all living together, and then we have the father who's living somewhere else and the boyfriend who's currently away at some training. We don't know too much about them. But in differentiating from self, we can see that the mother's kind of holding on. She doesn't want Sarah to move out. She obviously is perhaps moving some guilt to keep Sarah at home. And she's using her experience with divorce to possibly prevent Sarah from getting married. So when we have family members who are undifferentiated, they tend to become more emotional, more reactive to problems, and less likely to recognize their own autonomy. So Sarah might be struggling with her own autonomy, and so might Emily when her mother insists that Sarah helps her with things daily, like daily tasks, due to her delay. So that brings us to impairment of children. So we have impairment of children. Sorry, my mic cut out, guys. I'm back. So when we have impairment of children, a family with one or more impairment or children who have an impairment can suffer additional stressors. So it could be excessive worrying, being overly protective, heightened anxiety levels between parents or siblings. So one of the things that Sarah is talking to you about is she's feeling kind of nervous. She's not sure if she'll be able to move out and be able to leave Emily at home. She feels kind of attached, that maybe she's been having to help Emily a lot as an older sibling with daily tasks, and maybe she's really concerned that Emily won't be able to take care of herself if she moves out, or that all the responsibility of taking care of Emily will then fall on her mother, Karen, even though Emily's insisted that she can do everything herself and she is very capable and independent. The last thing I'm going to point out to you guys is family projection process. So children can be susceptible, okay, that's a fun word, to inherited traits and behaviors from the parents. So family projection occurs when one or more parents project their problems to one or more children in the family. So here we have Karen, who's experienced a divorce. Things went really badly with the father, and she is assuming that because that's her experience, that's going to be exactly what happens for Sarah. She's really concerned that if Sarah leaves and moves out, she'll eventually end up getting divorced and having the same experience as she did. So that's just a few concepts from the Bowen family systems, and be able to look at a case and assess things from his perspective and how we can move forward. So I think we are now moving on to Chase.
Thank you, Michelle. So there might have been something that you guys have heard of or might have heard of at some point in your program about a genogram, or some people call it a genogram. And we got this is kind of what it can look like with this guy here standing in front of these papers. If anyone knows what show this is from, I'll give you bonus points, even though it's not going to really mean anything. Anyways, a genogram it's more than a family tree. It's where you're looking at multiple generations, basically all out on paper or on a whiteboard, chalkboard, whatever you want to use to write it on. There's software that you can use to really dig in and do this. But what you're looking at is you're looking at your family. So you, as a starting point, your mom and dad, and whatever that might look like, whether that's biological or it's adopted or anything like that. Um, and then you're looking at grandparents, and in some cases, if you really wanted to, you could go back to great grandparents. So I mean, really looking at like 2 to 3, maybe 4 generations at a time, depending on how extensive of work you really want to do. But in terms of what it can be used for, you can use it to identify patterns. So generational patterns that might be present in your family. So if you write down that, you know, you're struggling with alcohol, and you have like an alcohol problem, like it's an addiction or whatever it might be, or there's a lot of diabetes in the family, or there's a lot of divorce in the family, or young death in the family. If you start seeing that pop up, you can start to notice patterns basically throughout throughout your family and whatnot. So what I want to do is I just want to take a fun look at a popular family for the most part, and just have a little fun with it. So I'm not the biggest Star Wars fan. I'm more of a Star Trek guy. The people that know me know that. But here's the thing. The Skywalker family, we know, is essentially, you know, they're the heroes, they're the centerpiece of Star Wars as it is right now. So we have the Skywalker family, and at the bottom, we're looking at Ben Solo, or as he's otherwise known as Kylo Ren. And we see that he is the son of Han Solo and Leia Organa. And there's a lot of lines going on. And there are keys that you can look at to make sense of all this. I don't want to get in the weeds with it right now. But some basic things that I want you to understand is that a square means male and a circle means female. And whenever you have the brackets between them, kind of like you see with Han and Leia, that means that they had a child together. You have others around here, like we have over here with Leia going over towards the right, towards Bail Organa. That is a hashed or a dotted, however you want to call it, blue line, which denotes adoption. If there's a cursor that I can use real quick to point at Ben to Luke, so the bottom to Luke, right there. That right there represents hate. So the triple lined kind of railroad track looking thing, or just dotted triple red, that means hate. So Kylo Ren, or Ben Solo, hated his father and he hated his uncle. And looking from Luke to Vader, or Anakin Skywalker, we have some squigglies going on, a red squiggly, which means close violence. So every time father and son, in this case, would be in contact with each other, there would be some kind of fighting that would always occur. And for those of you that have seen the movies, the original movies, 4, 5, and 6 that came out in the 70s and early 80s, you know that was the case up until there was some kind of redemption that took place in the final movie. Now, the other thing that is I think worth noting is we look at the top at Shmi Skywalker, who's top middle. We look at the Lars family, middle left, and we also look over at Padme Amidala, who married Anakin in one of the movies. All of these folks, they're all deceased. So there's some kind of hash, there's an X of sorts going through their symbol. But the thing that's kind of interesting about this family is the nature of their death. So whether it's with Shmi, it's with the Lars family, or it's with Padme, all of them had a violent death of some kind, or just severe violence that was going on that contributed significantly to their death. So just having this cursory information I want you to think about what you could do and the kind of work that you could do and kind of unpack with the families, with the Skywalker family, with the Solo family, talking about adoption, because we have adoption on both sides with Luke and Leia, going to two different families, having two different upbringings, and then they eventually come back together. How do their upbringings affect the family system for the Skywalkers? So these are just some basic things. There are other symbols on there. And it's certainly worth looking at more. And I want to encourage you to download GinaPro. It's a software program that'll do all this for you, and you can really unpack it, and you can really do some really good work with the families, with the individuals that you're working with in family therapy. Now, apart from that, we are trying to think of things from an integration perspective, at least the best that we can. So we look at these two different scriptures. So in Matthew chapter 1, 1 through 17, we are learning about the genealogy, the family, what Jesus came from, how he came all the way back, how he went in the Wayback Machine and came all the way forward, and how it really connects to today. And you can see this cute little image to the right of, kind of parsing it out. Now, the one thing that I want to talk about briefly is a particular passage of scripture found in Exodus chapter 20, verses 5 and 6. So it's at this point in the book of Exodus that they're actually talking about the Ten Commandments. So the Ten Commandments are being introduced, and I don't think that this is taking it out of context with what's being stated. So just prior to this, it's saying, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image." And then verse 5 starts out saying, "You shall not bow down to them nor serve them." And then it states, "For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me." Verse 6, "But showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments." Some of you, in show of hands, for those of you that are watching and can see this, might have seen or heard of something called iniquity or generational sin. This verse, I believe, is talking about that generational sin, that it might last for 3 to 4 generations, but the faithfulness of God covers thousands of generations. So what does that mean, and how can we give hope to our clients? When we're looking at genograms and we're working from a systems perspective, regardless of what flavor of systems we're using, we can point out these patterns, but we can also provide hope that through the work of Christ and the power of the Holy Spirit, that restoration and change can happen because of the faithfulness of God to cover those 3 or 4 generations. So it's an amazing thing what God can do in a family to cover those things and to affect positive change in families.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about a more contemporary psychologist who has done a lot of work when it comes to couples. And, if John Gottman had been able to intervene with the Star Wars clan, maybe things would have gone different for them in terms of the amount of violence and death they suffered. Unfortunately, he is in present time, and so there's nothing we can do for the past. Okay, so John Gottman, like I said, he's a psychologist. He studies couples. And really there was some research that came out that stated that those who are in happy married relationships live longer and are healthier. And so John Gottman began to explore what kept couples together. Divorce is on the rise, and he wanted to know how to help keep people together, to help people keep living longer and living happier lives. So he created the Love Lab in Seattle, and he has worked with over 3,000 couples. And at this point, he says that he can predict divorce with 91% accuracy with only listening to 5 minutes of conversation between them. He states that the secret is fairly simple. It's the dynamic of having more positive thoughts and feelings about your partner than negative. He said it's simple, it's not necessarily easy. Four dynamics that came out of his research that proved to be toxic to marriage relationships were what he coined as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And so those are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. So criticism is negative words about your partner's personality or character. And he said that criticisms would lead to harsh startups and arguments and fights. Then contempt is conveying disgust for your partner. And he said that this is fueled by long time negative simmering thoughts about your partner. So you may have had complaints or criticisms about your partner that after a long period of time, it turns into contempt. The next is defensiveness, and that in a relationship is when partners are describing a problem and their posture and attitude towards one another is, I'm not the problem, you're the problem. And then the last is stonewalling, which is when partners turn away from each other, they avoid fighting and they avoid the marriage. He said that stonewalling more often than not happens in males as a defense mechanism or as a coping mechanism. All right, so he created 7 principles for making marriage work based on, or he created this book based on the research of what destroys a marriage and what breaks it down. He created principles for what builds trust, love, and loyalty. And to briefly review these principles to build trust and loyalty, the principles are, first, you have to build what he calls love maps, and it's nurturing the friendship of your relationship. So building love maps is maintaining awareness of your partner's world, sharing fondness and admiration, turning towards each other instead of away, maintaining positive perspective. A positive perspective occurs when the friendship of your marriage is strong. Learn to manage your conflict. One hallmark of John Gottman is he says 61% or 69% of all conflicts can't actually be resolved. So you have to learn to manage your conflict. And you do that by accepting influence from your partner, being open to compromise, discussing your problems with your partner, taking turns listening to one another about your perpetual issues, and practicing your own personal self-soothing to keep yourself calm within conflict with your partner. Honor each other's life dreams, which means you make life dreams come true together. So you find ways to make what your partner wants happen, their big dreams. An example of that could be going back to school for your doctorate. You create a shared meaning in the relationship, and so you build a shared sense of purpose within the relationship, and you can answer the question, what is the mission and legacy of our marriage? So that is just a high-level view of John Gottman and his work with couples. And that, my friends, will conclude this wonderful presentation on family systems.